When I posted a video of me hanging out with my friends who happen to be native speakers, I got comments saying that,
"See, this is why Ella is good at English. It's because she had native speaker friends and she's living in a native environment."
completely diminishing my hard work and dismissing the fact that I started getting fluent when I lived and studied English back home in China, a whole year before I moved to America. There's a disturbing amount of objectifying going towards my friends who happen to be native speakers. On principle, I hate the idea of making friends with somebody just so I can get something from them. I especially hate the idea of making friends with native speakers just so I can be fluent, or more fluent. One, my friends are people. They're not objects. They're not meant to be used that way. And two, if I'm gonna depend on somebody for something, I doubt that those people are ever gonna see me as their true friend. But that's just me. You do you and I do me. This isn't a video about morals. It is, however, about why having a native English environment isn't all it's cracked up to be. And it's definitely not an absolute must if you want to be fluent. In fact, most of the time it does more damage than good. Hi, my name is Ella. I make videos about English in English and some other things. This is a debunking kind of video, so sit down, buckle up, let me take you on the ride, let me show you why you're wrong and what you can do if you don't have an environment, or even if you have one. I recognize how contentious and potentially heated this discussion is going to be. I understand that my opinion is probably going to be unpopular here, but hear me out before you click away. First of all, I'm not saying that pursuing higher education abroad is a bad idea, nor am I saying that studying English with a native speaker teacher or wanting to make friends with native speaker friends is wrong, or that you have any sort of ulterior motives if you do have those intentions. I am simply making a case for people who don't have an environment and feel like their English isn't as good as they hope because of their lack of environment, or for those who have the environment but feel like they don't have a voice to express their concerns or express their doubts because they feel like everybody has such high expectations on them. I'm not here to shame anybody. I'm not here to discourage anybody from doing anything, so just want to put that out there. If anything, I'm only trying to help. In this video, I'm going to talk about how some people get sold on these false beliefs, usually by
留学中介
or
大姑六婆
the people that don't know what they're talking about, but sadly, you're gonna be the only one to pick up this inevitable mess. In any case, to come to such a reductionistic argument without careful further examination is not helpful in doing anything intellectually demanding. So, before we start, I'd like to invite you guys to keep a healthy dose of suspicion and open-mindedness, at least for the remainder of this video. Besides, there's the difference between learning English and learning things in English. And to get the most bang for your buck, I feel like it's my personal duty to steer people towards the latter option. And only in doing so will your English truly get better inadvertently and naturally, like you had hoped. Number one, the idea that one's English will improve on its own by the sheer power of passive influence of a native environment is based purely on anecdotal and inconclusive evidence that I believe many people unknowingly and unwillingly took on, often citing very typical and misleading examples. Examples like 5-year-olds or toddlers moving abroad and growing up speaking English like it's their first language. Well, essentially it is. When you're little and barely started going to school yet, you haven't had that many words in your head. Most of your communication with your parents, your grandparents, or peers rely 50% on verbal communication at the most, and 50% on gestures or emotions or intuition. You can read studies of mothers and grandparents intentionally kind of dumbing down their language, or dumbing down is a bad word, but like simplify their language, essentially making baby talk so that their kids will understand. Another thing that helped is that the 5-year-old often goes to kindergartens surrounded by teachers and students who talk in the same way. Of course, they can quickly pick up on the language. Right around 10, 11, you're getting a lot of input of your native language and you're starting to read. If you're starting to read in your first language, it's gonna be particularly hard for you to make that switch immediately if you don't already have prior training. Luckily for you, it's not too late. People around you, namely your classmates, your teachers, are still at a minimal verbal communication skill. So there are still a lot of room for you to ask questions or have them repeat the same words again and again. Or generally speaking, you're not gonna encounter big words or complicated grammar. So like I said, luckily for you, there's still time. Now, I would say anyone who relocated to an English-speaking country between 13 and 16 or beyond is gonna have a particularly hard time, even though biologically speaking, 13 and 16 are still pretty young. For transparency's sake, I came to the States when I was 16 turning 17, and I would say I was amongst the most well-adjusted. And they always come up to me and ask why. Well, I have prior training. I mean, it's not hard, it's not rocket science, but I still have to study Did it ever occur to you? Let's talk about a typical 16-year-old kid who moved to an English-speaking country without prior training like I had. What happens to him or her? If you have never read anything as intense or as extensive as a normal high schooler here in any English-speaking country has, he or she is going to have a particularly hard time trying to catch up with the rest of the class. Because not only are you learning new information like everybody else is, you are also doing it in another language, the language that everyone else around you grew up with and read such intense and complex materials in. That's not to say that it's not possible. I mean, high schools can only ever get so hard. Some high schools and colleges even intentionally cut some slack for international students. Don't ask me why I know this. And unfortunately, there's an increasing underground market for ghostwriters who will do your homework, who will even go so far as to pass a test for you. It's not impossible to go through school or even graduate with flying colors. But to say that you can dropship yourself in a new environment and automatically pick up on this language in spoken and written format is just wishful thinking and crazy talk. Based on these examples, yes, an environment will help, provided that you've never had that much input of your native language, so in this case Chinese, preferably younger than 8 years old. You're gonna have an easier transition, provided that you don't mind sending off a literal kid at such a young age abroad. Plus, you're gonna spend a lot of money. Let's take 100 steps back and pretend that you have the means to move your kid as well as yourself abroad, and you have the money, you have the time. My question would be, do you really not want to learn Chinese first? Do you really want your kids to completely forgo this beautiful language? Because that's essentially what you're going to be doing. I see it all the time. ABCs here who grew up speaking Chinese only at home, they don't know how to write in Chinese, they don't know how to read in Chinese. They can only communicate on a minuscule level, only the basic logistics like have you eaten, have you showered, where are you going. They cannot communicate subtle emotional details with your parents, and honestly, it's kind of sad. I mean, sure, they can get ideas across, but do you really want to have such a gap in communication with your kids? Besides, let's not forget that Chinese is arguably the most difficult language to learn on earth. If I ever were to have a kid, I would for sure have them study Chinese first and worry about English later. But that's just me. The problem I have with these common examples we hear is that too many times there are so many variables as to why one's English has improved or hasn't improved, and the narrator or propagator of these examples often fails to acknowledge or properly address any of these inconvenient truths. Therefore, any conclusion they arrive at are not scientific truths. The definition of a scientific truth is that no matter who or where or when the subjects are, if you test the thesis provided that everything else stays the same, you're always going to get the same results. If you're saying that having a native environment will make you automatically fluent is a scientific fact, how do you account for hundreds of thousands of people who have that environment for many years and yet don't speak fluently? And how about those who don't have the environment and speak more fluently? Trust me, those are not the minority. Number 2, it was never the environment itself anyway. Other variables play a much bigger role. As we deducted from before, such variables include the level of fluency in your native language and the amount of input you've had in that language, how easy it is for you to interact with your age group, and lastly, how frequent you are able to communicate with that age group. At the end of the day, it's the quantity and quality of language input and output that makes the difference in one's language journey. And that all comes down to how well you can read, how much you've read, how many words you know, and how well you know them. Not only does quantity matter, quality also matters. I would even say quality matters even more because there are only so many words that native speakers use on a daily basis over and over again to, I would even say, an annoying amount. So as you can see, even when the natural acquisition of words or the general improvement of fluency does occur, it still takes a lot of pre-engineering and proper training prior. Most people either are unaware or willfully ignorant of the workings behind the so-called natural comprehension. This is why you get people from all walks of life, ranging from a tourist on a 10-day vacation to an immigrant living here in America for the 10th year, speaking broken or no English at all. I'm not shaming anyone here. However, I do want to point out this very common phenomenon. It's definitely way more common than you think. And this phenomenon exists precisely because people don't know the roots of their problem. They think they're not confident, they think they are not trying hard enough, there's something wrong with their genes, there's something wrong with their intelligence, they're not young enough, they're not mature enough, which just frustrates me to my core. Hopefully at this point you have realized that it's not laziness or shyness or lack of trying that contributed to most newcomers' struggle with trying to adapt to the new environment or measure up to the higher than expected but understandably demanding language requirement. Whether or not the environment facilitates fluency or how it facilitates fluency is secondary, and can be personalized. And it definitely needs to be thought out carefully and not just on a whim. Of course, when you get to a certain point in your language journey, you can access the great convenience and accessibility of that environment, namely going to a bookstore or using a censor-free internet to get information, or the occasional encounters and ventures with a native speaker, provided that you're ready. Of course, your English will get inadvertently better and more natural as you start picking up on idioms and slang, like I said before. But that's not to say the environment itself will do all that for you. Number 3, the environment is not a means to an end. It's not the way. It is the end goal. It is the end result. It's not because of the fact that I live here in the environment that I can speak properly. It's because I was able to speak properly. Therefore, I feel comfortable and competent enough to live in this environment without stressing out every day over basic survival needs. Environment doesn't help your speaking. You need to already be speaking to fit in. Now, of course, normal casual chit-chat is a lot easier than reading, especially big words, or writing your assignments, which is why most outsiders and false idea propagators assume that speaking and learning how to speak is casual and automatically improved through speaking to a native speaker in a native environment, just casually, nonchalantly, like it's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal. Speaking is so multifaceted and involves not only speaking, but also listening, reading, and writing, believe it or not. Just like how acting is 90% reacting to other actors, speaking is 90% reacting to other speakers. In order to react to other speakers, you have to first be able to understand. So there goes your listening. And listening is just a faster way of reading, like I mentioned in my other viral video. Just because native speakers are at ease and casual and nonchalant about speaking doesn't mean you get to be the same. It's a science. You have to be meticulous, you have to be more intentional about it. Speaking is more than just speaking. It's more than just pronouncing things. It's also writing, because you are constantly on the spot having to come up with, hopefully, a fully constructed sentence, not just broken words, so that people can understand you and not be confused. And there's really no shortcuts or gimmicks to achieve that kind of result, other than careful vocab study, careful grammar study, or if you want to have a somewhat similar accent, perhaps practice singing English songs. There are irregular components in speech like idioms, slang, internet language, and sometimes native speakers use incorrect or incomplete sentences or incorrect grammar. But 80 to 90% of speech is just regular English that we learned in textbooks, that we see on paper. Meaning that if you don't know how to write, if you don't know how to read, then you're gonna have a particularly hard time trying to listen and speak. Now, I want to address some counter arguments that I have received in my other debunking video, the one about listening. There are people saying that, well, how do you explain that little kids who never learned how to read, never learned how to write, they can just speak normally? First of all, they've never had their first language interfering with their second language. Of course, you're not gonna have any difficulty. You're not gonna need any guidance. I mean, text and words and reading and writing, they're just guides. I mean, why wouldn't you want to have a written language? Think about how hard it is for you to learn Cantonese, or in my case, 福州话.
写最写不忘，你看得懂吗？可玩嘅一程，原怎么样？原就那样独立所用，没独立所用。
There's no text, there's no way for me to mark out how a word is pronounced. I literally have to memorize everything vocally and sonically. When you get to a certain age, words are there to help you. You can read so much faster, you can digest so much information if you know how to read. I mean, think about little kids. When they can't read, they have to rely on the people around them to slowly build their vocabulary. And they can only communicate so much. If you don't believe me, just hang out with a little kid and observe the way they speak, observe the way they interact with adults around them. I'll give you another example. A few years back, I met a 4-year-old native speaker. Essentially, we have the same amount of time invested into this language. It was 4 years for her, it was 4 years for me. At first glance, you might think, oh, maybe my accent isn't as good, or maybe I didn't pick up on the language naturally. Maybe I have to read more, maybe I have to be more meticulous about grammar. But at the same time, I can read, I can convey complex emotions, I can express myself in such nuanced, such subtle ways that a 4-year-old just can't. And that 4-year-old kid can't even write her name. I mean, no shame in that. I couldn't do shit when I was 4. I'm just saying, when you're an adult, don't be complaining about the fact that you have to read, that you have to write. It is such a big help. Okay? I want to address another counter-argument that I often get. People will say, oh, they didn't speak English at all before, and now after they moved to America, they speak some English. I've never said that coming here will not help at all. Of course it will help, because if you get dropped into an ocean and you've never swum before, for sure you're gonna paddle, you're gonna figure out a way to, float. That's just your survival instinct kicking in. However, I think for most people, they don't want their language learning process to be that strenuous, that intimidating, that scary, and most importantly, not as efficient and effective as it could be. The problem isn't that you didn't improve. The problem is that you didn't improve as easily, as less emotionally jarring. You didn't improve as much as your counterparts who never had environment did. Not to mention, your approach isn't exactly efficient or sustainable. So if you ever want to go beyond just some broken English, there will be no way of doing that, even if you have the environment. I have other targeted videos specifically talking about how you can learn English at home, on the internet. I'll skip all that, otherwise this video will just be too long. But here's the gist. Pretend you're living abroad. Better yet, pretend you're a native speaker. What would someone in your age group be consuming every day? What books, what TV shows, what YouTube videos, or reality TV shows? If you don't know anything, go on Bilibili. Look for any 翻译视频. Problem is finding the proper material for you to study. And yes, not just glance over, not just watch without reading subtitles, not just enjoy. You really have to treat them like textbooks. You have to be more serious and more meticulous than how you would with your textbooks because they are more intense. And because you don't have a teacher guiding you, you really have to depend on yourself. You really have to incorporate vocabularies or any secondary tools and references you can find. Now it's time to select the range of vocab. Most adults, on average, only ever read at a 4th grade level. So that's roughly about 4,000 or 3,000 words, which I'll put a link to down in the description. I'm not saying you have to memorize or even understand every word right at once. Don't print out the list and then immediately memorize 10 words every day. Don't do that. I would even say that my memory is like right here, and I've tried and failed horribly. I mean, even if you can memorize the meanings of them, what can you do with them? You've never read these words in a context. You've never heard a native speaker, in the form of TV or in real life, use this word, therefore cementing your understanding of this word. How are you ever going to understand it right away? How are you ever going to feel comfortable using this word? Rather than trying to force yourself to memorize anything, incorporate these words into your daily life. Incorporate these words into everything you read, everything you use in English. You won't forget those words, and you'll actually use these words in your speech. You'll actually understand what native speakers are talking about because you're not just memorizing random ass meanings that you've never seen or heard or, to be honest, understood. Like I said, the point is not for you to memorize everything on that list alphabetically. I mean, that's not the point. It's only meant to give you a guidance so you don't study just any random word. There's the most common 1,000 words, there's the most common 2,000 words, and you get the gist. And also there's a difference between the most common words in spoken format and the most common words in written format. Those little markers are all there to help you prioritize better. And if you really want to increase the speed of your comprehension, increase the flexibility of your communication, you really need to start learning these words in English using English definition. In the beginning, it might be a little hard, but you need to make a conscious effort to transition into a fully English dictionary so that next time you speak, you don't have to translate from Chinese to English, or next time you hear someone speak, you don't have to translate his or her speech from English to Chinese and then you having to translate your thoughts from Chinese to English. You could just think in English and understand in English. I mean, that's just saving time, and time is money. Another thing you can do to spice up your vocab learning experience is to look up some of the words you've already learned in middle school or high school, but you only know 1 or 2 definitions. You won't be wondering, oh, what word should I study? What material should I study? When you don't know what to do, just go look up words you already know, and you'll find out there are so many ways, so many interesting ways to use this very ordinary word that you used to look down on. It's like finding money in your old laundry. Even though you may know the same amount of words as your average native speaker friend does, the words we think we know, native speakers have multiple usage, have flexible ways of using them that we just never learn in textbooks or never bother to look up in a proper dictionary. For instance, when it comes to the word hang, a native speaker would most likely use hang out, hang on, hang off, hang yourself, get hanged. I can't think of more expressions on the spot, but you get the point. There are so many ways of saying hang that have nothing to do with its original meaning that we just don't learn in textbooks. And our teachers might not know either. Once you are able to get a grasp of 80% or even 70% of these 3,000 words, both in quantity and in quality, you'll have a much easier time because most materials or conversations that you encounter will only consist of those 3,000 commonly used words. That being said, the foundation of these words is very important if you want to come here from middle school and beyond, because no one is going to babysit you and repeat these words to an annoying amount of times for you to comprehend and pick up naturally. Even if someone is willing to do that, you simply do not have the luxury of time. and repetition that babies have. There's absolutely no gimmick, no fast track for that. You just have to study the words, you just have to read, you just have to take notes, you just have to focus almost all your effort on this foundational part, because all the bells and whistles are only optional. And plus, if you master the foundation, if you master the basics, you'll naturally and easily pick up on those anyway. As a beginner, choosing the right material and choosing the range of words in a concentrated period of time is like 90% of the strategy. I see a lot of people studying kind of bits and pieces here and there. They'll read a news article here and then watch some like very conversational TV show and kind of get them mixed up. And sometimes they'll even watch something in British English and then over here study something in American English. Just get everything mixed up. In the beginning, you want to have your effort focused on one thing or one aspect or one source material or one region of dialect. So don't get your priorities mixed up. There are so many videos and resources on pronunciation and grammar, so I just won't talk about them in this video. However, I do want to say that I just don't get why there is a tendency to over-focus on pronunciation while completely dismissing the importance of grammar. Over-focus doesn't even cut it. I feel like people glorify people who seemingly have a good accent and just shame or shit on people who don't. For instance, I saw so many comments under a video of Ma Siwei interviewing Rich Brian. He was flexible, he was quick, he could understand Brian so well. And sure, there were minor grammar mistakes, mind you, not even pronunciation mistakes. I'm really sick of people saying that, oh, Ma Siwei 口音不好，发音不好。发音不好个屁！你的英语有他好吗？ I mean, most of the time, people who know what they're talking about, even if they see someone making a mistake, they'll be real specific about it. I feel like only those who are amateurs are laughing at people when they don't even know what to laugh at. How well you can communicate your thoughts, how well you can understand other people are all things that are far more important and useful. That being said, you would think that someone like me, who's all talk and who's all, spoken English, would disqualify the importance of grammar. I'm surprisingly advocating that you actually spend more time studying grammar. Now, this is not to say that you need to do tests or mock tests or practice your multiple choice questions. No, studying grammar for me is like studying the structure of a sentence. I've talked about this in my other video, Okay, so what if you're in that environment already, or you have lived in that environment and your English or spoken English still isn't as good as you had hoped? What do you do in that situation? First of all, you have to admit to yourself. Just come out already. No need to be shamed. It's not your fault. This idea that your English will magically become better is only sold to you by all these manipulative snakes oil salesmen who don't have your best interests at heart. It's not your fault. And if your parents continue to think, oh, it's because you're shy, it's because you're not confident, it's because you're not working hard enough or studying hard enough, send this video to them. However, you do have to manage your expectations. Basically, you're gonna still have to do the same things, but with twice the amount of pressure and psychological warfare with your parents. I mean, sure, you have access to bookstores, libraries, censor-free internet, but by the time you know to use these resources or know how to use these resources, it doesn't matter where you live anymore. 就比如说我现在成年了，虽然在非中文的环境下生活，但是不影响我平时学习中文，对不对？我到现在都还在写好词好句，我到现在还在写字帖，我到现在平时虽然看的不是很多，但是还是有保持中文阅读，对吧？我没有到那种 because I didn't live in China, I couldn't speak Chinese anymore。但是有很多人反过来就会说，因为我没有那个英语环境我留学然后回国了，然后现在英语就退步了。I mean, sure, 你的语言可能会变得生锈一点，可能你讲话没有那么 witty, interesting, funny, or profound, but it shouldn't be an excuse as to why you can't speak at all once you go without the environment. So those of you who have the environment, who can't speak as well as you hoped, manage your expectations. You're still surrounded by this great library, this great selection of books, many videos, and you don't have to use a VPN. You can just go online and find things in that language faster than people who need a VPN. So there's their advantage. On top of that, sure, occasional banters, occasional encounters with native speakers at the right timing when you're ready, sure help you get better at, humor and different ways of expressing yourself that are completely optional, and also you can pick up from watching TV. So essentially, you're gonna have to do the same thing that people without the environment has to do, with more pressure, with more of a time crunch, especially if you're in school, especially if you're trying to graduate from high school and go into college. I highly recommend studying on weekends during spring break or summer break, especially when you're entering college. Otherwise, you'll be overwhelmed by the amount of reading and writing in college. So, in summary, do I think a native environment will reinforce your already good learning habits and maybe provide some convenience and great accessibility to some of the resources that you can't find in your home country? Yes. So I think having an environment will help you with the bells and whistles of a language, the cherry on top of English, namely slang, idioms, internet language, and cheeky ways of saying things. Yes, but there are multiple ways of doing that without ever leaving your home country. However, do I think a native environment is absolutely needed? No. Do I think that people without a native environment are worse off than those who do? No. In fact, there are so many examples out there. My favorite one being Arnold Schwarzenegger versus Christoph Waltz, both of them from Austria.
I've only been in America for 51 years. I mean, give me a break.
Yes, how is it possible that your accent has not subsided even to the slightest degree?
Je suis au regret de vous informer que j'ai épuisé l'étendue de mon français. I'm very familiar with you and your family. I have no way of knowing if you are familiar with who I am.
Alright, I finally finished this video. Don't know how I did, but feel free to leave your thoughts, leave your feedback in the comment section. Whether you agree with me or disagree with me, it's always nice to see a dialogue going on. It always creates kind of an interesting dynamic. I'm always scared to do a debunking video. One, because I worry it's gonna be boring. Two, because I worried I didn't make a compelling case or I didn't provide enough evidence, but I think I did a sufficient job or decent job considering how much time went into preparing the script. I have been meditating or procrastinating on this video for 3 months. I thought it was 2, but I went back to my Instagram stories and it was literally July 3rd that I finished my first draft. I did this video in the language that I feel most comfortable with, which is English, which sounds like a humble brag, but really it's more about accessibility because the stuff that I consume nowadays is primarily in English, which unfortunately means that I have to spend a lot of time transcribing it and translating it, which will make this video even longer. Why did I do this to myself? All this for your enjoyment. All this for your education. I partially blame procrastination, but also I want to take my time really making an argument, really making a good case as to why this idea, this belief is just not factually correct. I'm of course open to discussion. I mean, this is just my theory, although in my opinion, a superior, a more evidence-backed theory, but it's still just a theory. It's not exact science. It's not like I can conduct a controlled study. Although if any of y'all are willing to sponsor such an experiment, I'm open to it. I'm your girl. Just hit me up. Some of you guys who have watched similar videos that I did before might be a little sick and tired of this kind of debunking video, but bear in mind, I am talking to the general public here. Like, you wouldn't believe how many people still come up to me and be like, I can't be good at English because I don't have the environment. Like, can you imagine if I, with this less than fit body, went up to a fitness 健身教练 or a 健身 up 主 and we're like, oh, you're only fit because you hang out with fit people. Can you imagine the ridiculousness in saying that? We give so much leeway to people who will just blame their lack of fluency on any excuse they can think of. Why do we give ourselves so many excuses is what I'm trying to figure out. At least I have the guts to admit that I'm fat because I don't want to exercise 90% of the time. So as sick and tired as you might be from watching this video, it doesn't even come close to how sick and tired I am of hearing this and seeing this idea, seeing this belief percolating around people trying to learn this language, trying to be better at this language with or without an environment. Hopefully I won't have to address the same issue over and over again. So, fingers crossed.